In Black Wrestling News. Tonight, I want to talk about one of the all time greats, one of the all time greatest black pioneer wrestlers of all time during his prime and during his time, Thunderbolt Patterson. An individual, oftentimes, he is credited with doing some extraordinary things, but yet at the same time, we rarely hear anything about him. So, just for nostalgia's sake, let's pull up some photos of Thunderbolt Patterson before I begin the stories on tonight. You all remember this guy, don't you? Yes, sure you do. Thunderbolt Patterson. All right, now let's get into the essence of this story. Black Wrestling News with your host, Tyrone Bowman. Thunderbolt Patterson. So who is he? Claude Patterson, who was born July 8th, 1941, he is an African American retired professional wrestler, known by his ring name Thunderbolt Patterson. He began his career in 1964 and wrestled primarily in Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas during the early 1970s. His complaints of institutional racism and attempts to form a wrestlers union. Well, that'll do it. That'll do it right there, and I'm quite sure it didn't go well. So his birth name is Claude Patterson, and he is now 82 years old. And so let's talk about this brother and find out exactly who he is. So he's had several ring names: K.O. Patterson, Sweet Daddy Brown, T-Bolt, and he was billed as 6 feet or 183 centimeters and billed from Atlanta, Georgia. He was trained by Pat O'Connor and Steve Kovacs. He debuted in 1964, retired in 1974. Let's talk about the beginning of the career of the one and only Thunderbolt Patterson. Patterson had grown up in Iowa and worked for John Deere in Waterloo, Iowa. When he broke into professional wrestling in the Kansas City area, promoter Gus Karras put Patterson in matches against Don Soto in 1964. In 1965, Patterson moved to Texas and worked with promoter Dory Funk Sr. The following year, he traveled to California, where he held the WWA Tag Team Championships with Alberto Torres. He also continued to work in Texas, where he worked as a villainous character in Dallas until he was turned on by his partner, Boris Malenko. Fritz von Erich, one of the all-time greats, had a Russian chain match with Malenko for Patterson's contract, which Malenko owned. In 1969, he worked for Big Time Wrestling in Michigan and Ohio. In 1970, he feuded with Jose Lothario and held the Florida version of the NWA Brass Knuckles Championship. Wow, that'd be interesting to see during this day and age if they could use brass knuckles in the ring. In 1970, he feuded with, Patterson agreed to work for an outlaw promotion, that is, one outside of the NWA, run by Ann Gunkel, the widow of his old friend and Georgia promoter, Ray Gunkel, in January 1974. In January 1975, he moved to Big Time Wrestling in Detroit. In December 1975, he began to wrestle for the NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance promotion in Florida, where he remained until April 1976. In 1976, he won the NWA Florida Heavyweight Championship from Bruiser Brody. Well, that must have been a heck of a battle, because Brody was one of the toughest men to ever grace the squared circle. May rest in peace. In 1977, he scored a surprise pinfall win over The Sheik in Toronto for the U.S. title, but lost 3 weeks later. He then switched to Georgia Championship Wrestling, where he remained until 1980. And if you know anything about Georgia Championship Wrestling, that was one of the greatest promotions that came across TBS. He spoke out against poor working conditions for wrestlers in the 1970s and participated in a racial discrimination lawsuit. He has claimed that as a result, he was blacklisted from wrestling in the mid-1970s. He had been complaining about racism from promoters for many years. He would later recall the only Dory Funk Jr. had backed him and wanted to start a wrestlers union, a dream he shared with former NFL player and wrestler Jim Wilson. Himself blacklisted, he has said that it was years with Patterson, claiming to be working at the Los Angeles Times in the interim before he has said his blacklisting was lifted when Dusty Rhodes took ill in Florida in 1975. Patterson joined Ole Anderson as a tag team partner in 1984, and they briefly held the NWA National Tag Team Championship. Ole's kayfabe cousin, a young Arn Anderson, came to the sport, and Ole saying he was tired of carrying guys like Patterson and Dusty Rhodes. Imagine that. Patterson, imagine Ole Anderson carrying the American dream himself, son of a plumber, Dusty Rhodes. Yeah, right. So they broke up with Patterson and joined Arn in what would be the foundation for the Four Horsemen. Actually, did you know? People didn't really know that the Four Horsemen concept and creation was created by Dusty Rhodes. He's the one who created it, and he's the one that made it happen. Ric Flair talked about that extensively. I did a profile on Ric Flair about 300 videos ago, but I think I'm going to profile Ric Flair again. The reason why, because Ric Flair, without a doubt, he is definitely the man. He's still the man. He may not be wrestling anymore, but he's still good. So check it out. So Ole Anderson, Arn Anderson team up. Eventually, they formed the Four Horsemen, which would include the NWA Heavyweight Champion Ric Flair and Tully Blanchard. Patterson retired from full-time wrestling in 1985. He then appeared in the ring in 1993 at a Legends reunion match at Slamboree 93, where he teamed with Brad Armstrong to defeat Ivan Koloff and Baron von Raschke. He would also mentor Ice Train until retiring completely in 1994. On July 27, 2019, Patterson was inducted in the 2019 class of the Georgia Trigos / Luthez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame in his hometown of Waterloo. On March 13, 2024, it was announced that Patterson will be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. So in the next video in part 2, I'll talk about Patterson's personal life, his championship, and accomplishments. But for now, thanks for watching Black Wrestling News. I'm Tyrone Bowman.